So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining Toro's breakfast briefing on cyber essentials. We've got Gareth presenting today. He's our cybersecurity expert and also our cyber essentials whiz. So thank you, Gareth. So to start with, just a bit of housekeeping. So as you can obviously see, your cameras and microphones are turned off. This is just for your privacy, but please do use the chat function throughout to ask any questions, and Gareth will get to these questions at the end. We are recording the session, and you will receive a recording of the session at the end. And I think that's all from me. So I'll hand over to Gareth, who's going to go through the agenda of what we're going to look at today. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Liv. So good morning, everyone. I'm Gareth Stinton, and as Liv said, I'm a cybersecurity specialist at Toro. Just a little bit about me. I'm a former British Army officer, and for the last 11 years, I've worked in IT, cybersecurity, and risk management. I've plied my trade with companies of all shapes and sizes. I worked at some giants in the financial services like Deutsche Bank and Barclays, and I've also supported small charities and NGOs. More relevantly to today, I've helped companies across that spectrum get Cyber Essentials certified. So I've seen it all, so to speak. What we're going to cover today, as you can see from the agenda, first of all, I'm going to tell you what Cyber Essentials is, the difference between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, because it's a two-tier certification. Talk about the benefits of getting Cyber Essentials certified, the 5 control themes around which Cyber Essentials is based. Then we'll finish off with some FAQ, talk about the certification process and hints and tips, and then there will be an opportunity for everyone to have some Q&A at the end. So we'll take it nice and slow. And as Liv said, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. So let's get started. First of all, what is Cyber Essentials? It's a UK government-backed scheme that's been around since 2014. It's designed to be industry agnostic, low cost, and applicable to businesses of any shape or size. That's from micro businesses with only 1 employee to large multinationals with thousands of staff. And I've seen, as I said, from one end of the spectrum, get Cyber Essentials certified. The goal of Cyber Essentials is to protect you from the most common cyber attacks. So by that, I mean the kind of threats that organizations face all the time, often on a daily basis, probably multiple times a day. And the kind that it's a case of when, not if, we have to deal with them. Now, the standard itself is designed by the National Cybersecurity Centre and has gone through a number of major and minor updates since its release. It's quite prescriptive, particularly compared to other standards and frameworks that you might be familiar with in this area, such as ISO 27001 or NIST's cybersecurity framework. But it's also much simpler than either of those and should be viewed as more of an entry-level certification. As I mentioned before, there are 2 tiers of certification, Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Now, the scheme is run by an organisation called IASME, which stands for the Information Assurance for Small and Medium Enterprises. They run the certification process and they manage the certifying bodies such as Toro, who are authorised to assess and approve, who are authorised to assess and approve Cyber Essentials applications. Okay. So there are 2 tiers of certification, Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Now, you must become Cyber Essentials certified before you can choose to move on to Cyber Essentials Plus. And each of these, despite the naming difference, is judged against the same standard, but the processes of certification are slightly different. Cyber Essentials is applied for by answering a questionnaire of up to 75 questions. It's what they call a self-assessment, meaning that you are expected to answer the questions honestly for yourself without any assurance from a third party. Now, assessors will review those answers and judge whether they comply with the requirements. So that's Cyber Essentials in a nutshell. Cyber Essentials Plus requires an audit from a certifying body to scrutinise whether you are complying with the standard. Now, there is a defined audit process, so all the audits are conducted with a uniform set of tests to check compliance. No two audits will be different in that respect. So as such, Cyber Essentials is appropriate for businesses who want to improve their cybersecurity using a recognized standard, while you can think of Cyber Essentials Plus as something that gives assurance to third parties and yourselves, to be fair, that you are compliant and that you take cybersecurity seriously. So quite straightforward. Cyber Essentials, self-assessment, Cyber Essentials Plus, independently audited to check that you comply. Now, let's talk about some of the benefits of Cyber Essentials. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, it enhances your cybersecurity. So as I said in the introduction, it's designed to protect organizations from the most common cyber attacks, so the ones we face all the time, and the ones that you're most likely to be breached by because they're so common. Another benefit is that if you're looking for a cybersecurity or information security framework or standard to comply with, then Cyber Essentials is very low cost, providing that you have at least somewhat up-to-date IT hardware. Then you shouldn't need to purchase anything to comply, and the price of the certification process is low. And I'll put some figures against that later in the FAQ. Next, you can also use Cyber Essentials as your way of improving your standing with clients. So by gaining certified, you are making the statement that you are taking cybersecurity seriously. So you can be trusted not only with their data, but also showing that you've taken steps to make yourself resilient and perhaps preventing an outage that could affect the services you provide to them. So you're going to stay up if an attack happens and not cause them problems. Now, naturally, this responsible approach to cybersecurity goes down well, not only with existing clients, but also with potential clients, and could be the difference maker between new business being won or being lost. So going a step further, it might make you eligible to bid for work that wouldn't have been available to you before. Now, for example, the UK government has since 2014, when Cyber Essentials was conceived, required suppliers bidding for certain types of contracts to hold Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus certification. And as I'm sure you all know, large businesses often put similar requirements in place for their suppliers. So it's not only going to help protect you, but also potentially open some doors that might otherwise have been closed to you. Now, just taking a step outside of our own organizations and looking at things from a supply chain perspective, putting into place the controls required by the standard makes it more resilient from top to bottom, by reducing cyber risk, by standardizing security practices, by improving security awareness and reducing the attack surface, and improving the overall resilience of the supply chain. If everyone in the supply chain takes cybersecurity seriously, following the same set of practices, that's going to make everyone better off. Now, something you might not know about, and I'm sure as soon as everyone saw the word free on the slide, their eyes were drawn to it. Any UK-based organisation with a turnover under £20 million who gets certified is entitled to free cyber liability insurance. That's up to a standard indemnity limit of £25,000. So that's not necessarily a huge amount of money, but it should be enough to cover a small breach. And any of you who've looked into it before will know cyber insurance is not necessarily a cheap prospect. So it's good to get that on top as part of the package. And lastly, by complying with Cyber Essentials, you are reducing the risk faced by your organization. So not only the risk of a data breach, but also the related financial, reputational, operational, and legal risks. So those are some of the benefits of getting Cyber Essentials certified. So as you can see, they are many, wide, and varied. Right, now let's start looking at the standard itself. As I said in the agenda, there are 5 control themes around which Cyber Essentials is based. So as you can see from the slide, they are secure configuration, user access control, firewalls, malware protection, and security update management. Complete details of the requirements in each of these themes can be found in, there's a document called the Cyber Essentials Requirements for IT Infrastructure, which is effectively the full guide to Cyber Essentials, and that's publicly available on the IASME website, written by the National Cybersecurity Centre. So let's go through the themes one at a time. First of all, secure configuration. The aim of secure configuration is very simple. It's to ensure that computers and network devices are properly configured to reduce vulnerabilities and provide only the services required to fulfill their role. Now, a lot of this is based around tackling the default out-of-the-box configuration of computers and network devices, which often have several known weak points, such as commonly known default passwords and unnecessary user accounts or applications. Commonly known passwords kind of speaks for itself why that's a problem, and unnecessary user accounts or applications are more things to manage and they're potential ways in for an attacker. If you don't need them, they shouldn't be there. The controls in the second theme, user access control, ensure that user accounts are assigned to authorized individuals only, and that they only give those individuals the level of access they need to do their job. Something you might have heard of as the principle of least privilege. People only need the privileges, the rights to get to the systems, the data they need to do their job. And the process of handing out accounts should be defined. It should require a level of authorization from people in a leadership role. Now on to firewalls. The purpose of the firewalls theme is very straightforward. It's to make sure that only secure and necessary network services can be accessed from the internet. And simply put, all your devices must be protected by a firewall. That's the way it could be summarized. Likewise, the malware protection theme is all about what you would imagine it to be. So to restrict the execution of known malware and trusted software from causing damage or accessing data. So that's either by protecting devices with antivirus or by restricting the software and applications that can be installed on them in some way. The last theme is security update management. And it's probably the theme that we see organizations having the most difficulty with, if I'm honest. The aim of the theme is to ensure that devices and software are not vulnerable to known security issues for which fixes are available. And I'll comment some more on that when we go on to the hints and tips later. But before I do, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to achieve Cyber Essentials certification. So there are a number of ways you can go about getting Cyber Essentials certified. The cheapest is to apply directly via the IASME website. So you will be sent login details to their platform where you can answer the questionnaire, and your application is then assigned to one of IASME's Cyber Essentials certifying bodies, which is companies like Toro. The certifying body will review your application. And they will either approve it, they'll either send it back to you because some non-compliances have been identified, or some of the information in your answers perhaps needs to be clarified. Those are the typical outcomes. It's also possible to fail the application. I'll go into that in more details in the FAQs in a minute, but it's actually not likely. So that method, as you can imagine from what I've said, relies on you being able to understand the requirements and implement the controls in your organization to gain compliance by yourself. Okay, you're submitting the application by yourself. You've done the work ahead of time to read the requirements document and put the controls in place. Now, if you feel that you need support on the journey to compliance, then you can approach certifying bodies for support with that process. And Toro offers a guided Cyber Essentials certification service. So as part of that service, we will walk you through the certification process. We will explain the requirements and the questionnaire, and we will review your answers to let you know if you are compliant and if not, explain to you why not. All right, it's what we call our hand-holding service. And once we judge you to be compliant, we'll help you get your application submitted and we will approve it ourselves. Now, certifying bodies like Toro, all the applications we review are audited, so we are trusted to mark our own homework, so to speak. And lastly, to achieve Cyber Essentials Plus certification, you will need to be audited by a certifying body. You can either seek one out yourself, or you can apply on the IASME website, who will provide you with quotes from up to 3 different certifying bodies. And obviously, this is a service that Toro provides as well. Okay, some frequently asked questions now. What are the costs involved? I said I'd put some figures against this later. Now, if you apply for certification directly via the IASME website, then the price is between £320 and £600, and that's dependent on the size of your organisation. IASME have a set organisation tiering system in terms of size, which is dependent on the number of staff. The cost of any guided certifications or the Cyber Essentials Plus audits are set by certifying bodies themselves, so they will vary. The second question, what happens if you fail? Now, you can try again. You are permitted to fail once and still submit your application again one more time before having to pay for a fresh application. Now, what I mean by fail is have your application marked as a fail. But like I said earlier, that's not a likely scenario. The reason for that is IASME want the assessment process to be a learning process for people applying as well. So those applying have the opportunity to improve their security posture. So assessors are generally discouraged from failing applicants unless it's a really low effort application. People haven't really bothered answering the questions, you know. And a more likely scenario is that your application will be sent back to you with comments from your assessor explaining why you're failing to comply and perhaps giving you a little bit of help along the way. Now, how long does it take? There is no set period of time to gain Cyber Essentials certification. And honestly, how long it will take depends very much on your starting point and how much effort you're putting into complying. Now, I've seen organizations that applied themselves complete the process in less than a week, but something in the order of 1 to 3 months is probably realistic for most organizations looking to go down this road. For some, it might take a lot longer. Larger organizations might have a bit more difficulty wrangling all their different assets and systems together. Some more concrete timescales that I can give you, that a direct application via the IASME portal, once it's submitted, will be reviewed within 2 working days. And if you want to go on to Cyber Essentials Plus, you must complete that subsequent certification process within 3 months of your Cyber Essentials certification. So once you've done Cyber Essentials, the clock is ticking for moving on to the next stage. Question 4, my organisation is not based in the UK. Can I still obtain Cyber Essentials certification? So yes, if your organisation is based outside the UK, you can indeed obtain Cyber Essentials certification. The only difference is that you will not be eligible for the free cyber insurance. And there are generally there's some nuance around who's eligible for the cyber insurance. That's explained on the IASME website if you're a multinational with businesses outside the UK, and depending on whether you've included the entire scope of your organisation in the assessment. But the IASME website explains all that. Question 5, how does Cyber Essentials apply to differently sized organisations? In principle, there's no difference, but there are some slightly different ways that the effective implementation of controls might be judged depending on the size of your organisation. Larger organizations with more funding and resources will be expected to have a tighter grip on things like the management of their devices, their patching process, whereas smaller organizations will be allowed to get by with manual processes, so they will be accepted. It's exactly where the line is drawn is up to the judgment of the individual assessor, but you can potentially contact IASME to appeal if you think you've been in any way hard done by. But like I said, bigger organizations with more resources will expect to have more tools at their disposal to ensure compliance, whereas small organizations where you can get everyone together on a meeting more easily, the bar is set a bit lower. How long does the certification last? It lasts for 1 year, after which you'll be expected to apply for renewal. Renewal should be a much easier job than the first time application, because it should just be a case of updating your previous application. And question 7, what's the difference between ISO 27001 and Cyber Essentials? The difference between them is actually quite large. Cyber Essentials is purely concerned with cybersecurity and is mostly based around good IT practices, while ISO 27001 is an information security standard with which therefore has a much wider scope, information security versus pure cybersecurity. And also, Cyber Essentials is an entry-level standard, while ISO 27001 is comparatively quite advanced. Cyber Essentials is also very prescriptive in how you should comply. You must do this, you must do this, you must do that. Whereas ISO leaves it much more up to between you and an auditor, whether you've complied with a requirement, which are quite widely phrased because it's so agnostic to different industries and so on. There's a looser wording used in ISO. And question 8, if you already have ISO 27001, why do you need to get Cyber Essentials? So you may not need Cyber Essentials if you have ISO 27001, but I cannot say with certainty that's the case. And it depends on your goals and how you have complied with ISO 27001. Now, it's quite possible that the steps you have taken to achieve ISO 27001 have also ticked all the Cyber Essential boxes on the way, but that's not guaranteed. Like I said earlier, it's less prescriptive in ISO. You may have found different ways of meeting their requirements, which doesn't necessarily mean you're also compliant with Cyber Essentials. As I mentioned earlier, the UK government requires many suppliers to hold this certification, but if you are able to show that equivalent controls are in place, then they may accept that. It says on government websites then they will accept that, but I'm not the government. I'm not going to state that with any certainty. Okay, just going to move on to some hints and tips, things I've learned from the many applications I've assessed and areas where people frequently come unstuck. So some things to help you with on your way to compliance with Cyber Essentials. Firstly, create a documented password policy. The only piece of documentation that Cyber Essentials requires you to have is a documented password policy that includes a process for what to do if you believe a password has been compromised. So if you haven't got one, I suggest you go away and create one. Plus, it's just good practice. People should understand in your organization what a good password looks like, what requirements you expect them to follow. The next one is security is a leadership responsibility. You should designate someone senior in the organization as responsible for information security. The questionnaire expects you to identify who is responsible for managing IT systems, and the standard expects people in leadership positions to approve user account changes like creation of new user accounts, granting people access to administrator accounts. So make sure leadership is involved in information security and that these things aren't done on the fly. Get on top of your patch management. So I mentioned earlier that the security update management theme is where people frequently come unstuck. It's one of the biggest challenges for applicants. Now, one of the requirements in Cyber Essentials is to install high or critical severity updates within 14 days of their release by the developer. And not only will that be something that a Cyber Essentials Plus auditor checks, but also I often find that applicants inadvertently give away in their answers that they don't meet this requirement. They will say, when the question comes along, do you install these updates within 14 days? They'll say yes. But earlier on, when they're asked to list the operating systems and versions of applications they use, they will list applications that are out of date, that don't meet that 14-day window. So get on top of your patch management, get a process in place to install security updates promptly, because not only will this cause you issues in getting certified, but failing to do so leaves you exposed to having your systems breached via known vulnerabilities. So aside from Cyber Essentials, it's really good security thing to take care of anyway. Right, passwords and multi-factor authentication. A large part of the requirements document is dedicated to a section called password-based authentication, and there are different ways you can comply with the password-based authentication requirements. But there are 3 simple steps you can follow, which are the easiest if you're a small organization, not a lot of controls, etc. in place. Firstly, require all passwords to be at least 12 characters in length. Secondly, use multi-factor authentication for all cloud services wherever it's available. Cyber Essentials does accept that if cloud services don't offer multi-factor authentication, then that's fine. But if they do, you have to have it enabled. And thirdly, educate your staff on how to avoid using common passwords. If you can follow those 3 rules, that should be enough for you to comply with the password-based authentication requirements. And incidentally, the NCSC has some really good advice about passwords, and I'd advise you to look it up. Common practices are often not regarded as best practices. Right, bring your own device. Cyber Essentials does not differentiate between personal devices and corporate devices. If a personal laptop is used to access corporate resources, even just email, then it falls within the scope of the assessment and is expected to comply with all the same requirements. There can be different ways to comply for BYOD devices versus corporate devices, though. You don't necessarily need to take a blanket approach. And the only other thing I'll bring out when we're talking about devices outside of the corporate environment is that we work from home a lot. People are sat behind ISP provided routers, and you're asked to talk about network hardware when you're applying for Cyber Essentials. ISP provided home routers are not in scope of the assessment, so you don't need to worry about those. And my last hint and tip, network boundaries, which is relevant to the point I just made, actually. So Cyber Essentials talks about the scope of the assessment in terms of network boundaries. It's important to know where your boundaries are, because that will determine what's inside the scope of the assessment and what's not. Now, for example, an area a lot of people have a bit of difficulty understanding. Lots of companies work in serviced offices where they don't own any of the hardware used to access the internet, like a WeWork or something. They just bring their laptops in, they connect to the Wi-Fi. So in that scenario, the network hardware is out of the scope of the assessment because they don't own it, they don't control it. And instead, you need to draw your boundary at the software firewalls on your laptops instead. Okay. Those offices might as well be a coffee shop where you're accessing the internet via the public Wi-Fi in that case. As far as Cyber Essentials is concerned, if you don't own the hardware, it's not within the scope of the assessment because you can't manage it, you can't control it. Right, that brings me to the end of my pre-prepared content. So I'm happy to answer any questions now.
Hi, Gareth. We've had a couple of questions in the chat box. So the first one, if we completed Cyber Essentials with Toro and received the free insurance, would we then be able to use Toro to help us with an incident, or would the insurer provide someone?
Well, in that case, you could absolutely use Toro to help you with an incident, but I couldn't say for certainty that the insurer is going to necessarily choose us to do so. They might do. It's not guaranteed. You could have a separate agreement in place to do so. Apologies, I'm not 100% on the ins and outs of the T's and C's of the insurance. If I'm honest with you, that would be more a question for IASME.
And we've had a question from Carl. It's a good point about passwords. Can Toro run the appropriate cybersecurity training? So it's jumped in conjunction with the certification process. So could we offer training alongside getting Cyber Essentials certified?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned before, educating your staff about common passwords, avoiding common passwords, is a good way to comply with the Cyber Essentials requirements. Training, increasing staff awareness is really important. And yeah, Toro could provide that training alongside it. We have a really good training package we could give you.
Cool. Thank you. Got a question from Ray. As some organisations move towards ZTNA and SASE architecture, how do you see Cyber Essentials changing in the coming years to embrace the change to network design?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And honestly, Cyber Essentials is kind of always evolving. So the most recently it the most recent update, the most recent question set is called Montpellier. The last one used to be called Evandine. They gave them these cool French sounding code names. And the most recent one moved to having more of a focus on cloud-based infrastructure and cloud-based working, as we all do these days. So I couldn't tell you exactly how it's going to change in the future as the way infrastructure trends go and so on, but I'm sure it will, as it has over the last 10 years.
Cool. It's had one from Mark. For non-tech companies with working from home capabilities, are VPN and or ZTNA a requirement to have network boundaries or the device firewalls enough? So, or are the device for firewalls enough?
So device firewalls absolutely are enough, but an alternative option would be if you did have an office, for example, with an office firewall, you can use VPNs when working from home to connect directly to that firewall to move yourself within the boundaries of that network there. So you could go either way, both would be compliant.
Had one from Alan. We're a small business. How many staff would you have to devote to the process? And would Toro be able to come to our office to make the process less impactful to productivity?
Uh, I mean, I can't say for certainty. Probably not. If you're a small business, you probably don't have a huge amount of hardware and that many different systems. One person who manages the IT systems should be able to take care of it by themselves. Um, if required, and you needed us to, Toro could come to your office to help you with the process. I've never needed to do that before. It's always been something we've been able to provide as a remote service, though.
Okay, brilliant. Has anyone got any other questions? I don't think so. Okay, so we'll give everyone 10 minutes back. So go and get a brew. Oh, well,
One more.
one more. Okay, so it's hard to find a provider who cover training as well as hand-holding through certification. We lack a CISO at the moment to steer our cyber and IT. Is this something Toro could offer assistance with as a virtual service?
Yeah, absolutely. Toro offer a virtual CISO service. So if you don't have a dedicated in-house resource to worry about your information security, Toro can provide that as a remote service who can give board level advice on information security, help you move your company into a more mature security posture, 100%.
Okay, perfect. I'm just going to post a couple of polls if people can just give their feedback on today's session, and you'll just see a pop up. And that's all. So thank you so much for attending. If there are any topics that you want us to cover for future breakfast briefings, please do just drop us a message on LinkedIn or send us an email, because obviously we want to cover topics that are really important to you. So please don't be afraid to get in touch with suggestions for future topics. Thanks again for giving up your morning, and thanks, Gareth, so much. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.